When you overhear your own family deciding whether you deserve to live, something inside you dies before your body ever does. They thought I was asleep, slipping away with tubes in my arms and machines beeping in rhythm with my weakening heart. But I heard every word, and I promise you, those words cut deeper than any illness ever could. Hello, my name is Edith Grant. I'm 74 years old, and before I begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? I'd love to know, because no matter how far apart we are, this story is one I know will resonate with anyone who's ever felt betrayed by the very people they raised. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. I'd been rushed to the hospital after collapsing in my kitchen. The doctors said it was a mild heart attack. Serious, yes, but not beyond hope. They wanted to run more tests, adjust my medication, and keep me under observation for a few days. I remember lying there, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air, the steady hum of machines beside me. I should have felt safe, relieved even, knowing I was in good hands. But safety, I've learned, has less to do with doctors and more to do with who's standing beside your bed. At first, my children seemed concerned. My son Michael came in with his wife, Melissa, faces tight with forced worry. My daughter Linda followed, scrolling on her phone even as she kissed my forehead. I thought maybe I was being unfair, seeing detachment where there was simply nerves. But then the voices started. I wasn't fully asleep. I drifted in that strange space between wake and rest, where everything feels like a dream, except it wasn't. My room door wasn't closed all the way, and through that small gap, their whispers carried in. "Don't waste medicine on her. She's done," I heard Melissa say. Her tone was sharp, impatient, as though I were a burden more than a mother-in-law. Michael muttered something, his voice low, but I caught the words. "The sooner this is over, the sooner we can deal with the house. The bank said we need clear ownership before we can apply for that line of credit." Linda's laugh was soft, almost casual. "She'll hang on just to spite us. But honestly, what's the point? Keeping her on all these meds just drains what's left of her account." I froze. My breath hitched in my chest, and I had to keep perfectly still so they wouldn't notice I was listening. My own children, the same children I had worked myself to the bone for after their father passed, were outside my hospital door, weighing the value of my life against money. I wanted to scream, to sit up and tear those IV lines out, to shout, "I hear you, I'm not gone yet, and God help you for speaking of me like that." But my body was weak, and my voice barely more than a whisper. So I lay there, still as stone, tears pricking the corners of my eyes, listening to my family discuss my end like it was a business transaction. The betrayal was more than I could bear. Every memory came flooding back. The nights I stayed awake sewing their clothes by hand when money was tight. The mornings I went without breakfast so they could have lunch money. The years of scraping, saving, sacrificing, all so they could stand where they were now, healthy, educated, comfortable. And this was how they repaid me, by calling me done before the doctors even finished their rounds. I thought of my late husband, Robert. What would he have said if he had heard them? He had trusted me to raise them with love, to teach them loyalty and compassion. If he could see them now, vultures circling a woman not yet in her grave, his heart would have broken all over again. That night, alone in the sterile white of my hospital room, I made a vow. If I lived through this, and oh, I would fight with every fibre of my being, I would not allow them to profit from my death. They would not get the house Robert and I built brick by brick. They would not touch the savings I had worked decades to protect. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer. If they see me as done, then I'll make sure they're done too. Done taking, done scheming, done leeching off me. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I stopped feeling like a patient, and I started feeling like a survivor. My body might have been weak, but my mind was sharp, sharper than they realized. They thought age made me soft, frail, easy to manipulate. They forgot I was the woman who had buried a husband, raised 2 children alone, and kept a household alive on pennies. They had underestimated me. The next morning, the nurse came in with my medications, smiling kindly as she adjusted my IV. "You've got strong vitals, Edith," she said. "You'll be back home in no time." I smiled faintly, though inside I felt fire rising. Back home. Yes, that was where my plan would begin. And as I lay back against the pillow, pretending to sleep when my children walked in again with their shallow smiles, I thought to myself, "You think I'm done? Watch me." The hospital discharged me 3 days later. My vitals had improved. The doctors adjusted my medication, and though my body still felt fragile, my spirit carried something it hadn't in years, a quiet determination. I didn't let it show on my face. To my children, I wore the mask of a tired old woman, grateful for their help, leaning on them as though they were still my anchors. Inside, I was studying them, every gesture, every look, every slip of the tongue. When Michael came to pick me up, he acted like the dutiful son. He carried my bag, held my arm, even opened the car door like a gentleman. But I noticed the impatience in the way he tapped the steering wheel when I walked too slowly, the sigh when I adjusted the seatbelt. Small things, subtle things. But to me, they spoke volumes. His care was an act. Linda, on the other hand, played it differently. She filled my fridge with groceries and fluffed the pillows on my couch, telling me how I had to rest and let her handle things. But when she thought I wasn't looking, her eyes darted around the living room, scanning the china cabinet, the clock Robert had left me, the silver frame with our wedding photo. It was as if she was already cataloguing what would soon be hers. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, never bothered pretending. She strutted around my house with her shoes still on, leaving her bag on my dining table, making calls as though she owned the place. Twice I heard her complain about how small the living room was, as if she was already envisioning a renovation I hadn't agreed to. She never once asked how I felt. Not once. The first evening home, they insisted on staying with me. "You shouldn't be alone, Mum," Michael said, his voice rehearsed. I nodded, though the truth was I longed for silence, for the space to breathe and think without their hovering presence. That night, while they slept in the guest rooms, I sat quietly in the kitchen with a cup of tea. My hand trembled slightly as I lifted the mug, but not from weakness, from fury. Their words from the hospital echoed in my head. "Don't waste medicine on her. She's done." If I was done, then what were they still doing here? Waiting, circling, counting the days until they could divide up what they thought was theirs. I pulled out a small notebook I kept tucked in a drawer. In neat handwriting, I began listing every account, every piece of property, every asset I had left. The house, the savings account, the pension, Robert's life insurance, which I had protected all these years. I wrote it all down, line by line, not to mourn it, but to prepare for war. The next morning, I made a call. Not to my children, but to an old friend, David, the lawyer who had handled Robert's will years ago. His voice, warm and steady, was a lifeline. "Edith," he said, after I explained what had happened in the hospital, "you still have full control. The house is in your name. The accounts too. If you want to make changes, it's entirely within your rights." I felt something lift from my chest, like a weight I'd carried too long. Full control. That phrase rang like church bells in my ears. My children thought I was powerless. But the truth? I held every card. David suggested we meet later in the week. "We'll review your deed and your accounts. Whatever you want to do, Edith, we'll do it." Quietly, I thanked him, my voice steadier than it had been in days. Hanging up the phone, I realized my plan was no longer just a thought whispered in a hospital bed. It was real. Later that day, Linda hovered in the kitchen while I made myself lunch. "Mum," she said casually, "you should let me handle your pension deposits. It's too much stress for you. Just add me to the account. I'll make sure everything's managed." I looked at her, pretending to be confused. Oh, sweetheart, I wouldn't even know how to do that. You'll have to explain it slowly. She smiled, triumphant, as though she'd cornered me, but inside I was laughing. I had already called the bank that morning and scheduled an appointment to restructure my accounts. By the time Linda thought she was being clever, the doors she wanted to open would already be locked. That night, lying in bed, I let my thoughts drift back to Robert. I pictured him sitting in his favourite armchair, glasses perched on his nose, newspaper folded in his lap. He'd always been the cautious one, the planner. He'd warned me gently years ago that our children might not turn out the way we hoped. "They'll love you, Edith," he had said. "But love gets tangled when money is involved. Promise me you'll never let them bully you out of what's yours." Back then, I thought his words were too harsh. But now, lying in the dark with the sound of my daughter snoring down the hall and my son pacing on the porch making calls, I knew Robert had been right. Love was one thing, greed was another, and my children had chosen greed. The next morning, I stood at the window, looking out at the small garden Robert and I had once planted together. The roses were still blooming, despite neglect. Strong. Resilient. I smiled faintly. If those roses could survive seasons of storms, so could I. And so could my plan. I whispered softly to myself. Let them circle. Let them whisper. By the time they realize what I've done, it'll already be too late. With that, I folded my arms, steady despite the ache in my chest, and turned away from the window. It was time to act. 2 days after returning home, I slipped on my thick cardigan, tucked my papers into a leather folder, and called for a cab. My children thought I was too weak to do much on my own, but I had no intention of telling them where I was going. Let them believe I was off to a doctor's checkup. In truth, I was heading to David's law office, my fortress in this storm. When I walked in, David greeted me with the same warm smile I remembered from Robert's time. His office smelled of leather and coffee, the shelves lined with neat binders and framed degrees. It felt safe, steady, like walking into a place where my children's claws couldn't reach me. "Edith," he said gently, pulling out a chair, "tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the hospital, about the voices I'd overheard, about the way Linda was circling my pension, and Michael was already talking to banks about loans. My throat tightened as I repeated Melissa's words. Don't waste medicine on her. She's done. For a moment, I thought I'd break. But then I saw the look in David's eyes. Not pity, not surprise, just resolve. "Then we'll protect you," he said firmly. "You still hold the keys. They can't take what you don't give." First, we addressed the deed. The house Robert and I had poured our lives into. The one with 40 years of memories, Sunday dinners, and Christmas mornings. I couldn't bear the thought of it landing in hands that saw me as a burden. David drafted the transfer papers, shifting ownership to someone else entirely. I thought carefully. Who deserved it? Who had treated me with kindness without asking for anything in return? My mind settled on Anna, my neighbour's daughter. She was 30, a nurse who often brought me groceries or stopped by just to check in. She once fixed my leaky faucet. When Michael didn't have the time, she treated me like family. When my own flesh and blood treated me like a wallet. "It's unusual," David admitted, "but not unheard of. If this is what you want, we'll do it." "It's exactly what I want," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. By the time I left his office, the paperwork was in motion. My house, my sanctuary, was safe from their greedy hands. Next came the accounts. Over the years, I'd kept everything neat and organized. A pension account, a modest savings, and Robert's life insurance payout. Nothing extravagant, but enough to live comfortably. I had let Michael and Linda believe I was careless with numbers, that I needed them to manage things. The truth? I knew every dollar, every withdrawal, every penny. David connected me with a banker he trusted, a woman named Rachel. Together, we restructured everything. I closed the accounts with joint access, rerouted my pension into a new account under my sole control, and froze the credit cards my children thought they could use for emergencies. Rachel leaned over the desk, sliding papers toward me. Mrs. Grant, once this is signed, no one but you will have access, not even your children. If they try, the bank will call you immediately, I signed, pressing the pen hard enough that my hand ached. But the ache felt good. It felt like carving my signature into the very shield that would protect me. For the next week, I played the role of the fragile mother. I let Linda drive me to the pharmacy, let Michael complain about the bills piling up, let Melissa walk through my living room in her heels like she owned it. All the while, my heart hummed with a secret they couldn't touch. One afternoon, Michael came into the kitchen holding his phone. "Mum, I've been talking to the bank about a loan. They said something odd about the deed not being in order. Did you change something?" I blinked slowly, setting down my teacup. "Oh, I don't remember. All those papers confuse me." Melissa frowned, sharp-eyed. "You'd better not be making things complicated. You know we're only trying to help." That word nearly made me laugh out loud. Their help had nearly written me into the grave. Instead, I smiled faintly and said, "Of course, dear. I'll let you know if I find anything inside." I was savoring the moment. Their loan was denied because of me. Their hands were already slipping off what they thought they had secured. That night, I sat by the window, watching the sun dip behind the trees. I thought of Robert again, of the nights we'd spent at this very table balancing checkbooks and planning our children's futures. He'd always said, "We may not have much, Edith, but what we do have, we'll protect." I whispered into the quiet. "I'm protecting it now, Robert. Not for them, but for myself." As I closed the curtains, I felt no guilt. My children had drawn the battle lines in that hospital when they declared me done. All I had done was answer them in kind, silently, carefully, and with the full force of a mother's resolve. And as the week went on, I could see cracks forming, whispers between Michael and Linda, frustration boiling in Melissa's clipped tone. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't yet know what. That was fine. I was in no hurry. Let them stew. Let them grow restless. Because when the truth came out, it wouldn't be whispers anymore. It would be a storm. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. My children had always been impatient, but now their urgency had sharpened into something darker. They weren't just waiting for me to fade. They were counting on it. And when the money they thought would flow so easily stopped reaching their hands, their true faces began to surface. It started with Linda. One afternoon, she cornered me in the kitchen, her phone in hand, her smile too sweet to be genuine. "Mum," she said softly, "you know your pension comes in this week. Why don't you just let me handle the deposit? You shouldn't be worrying about all that paperwork in your condition." I looked at her, letting my hands tremble just slightly as I set down the kettle. "Oh, sweetheart, I already took care of it." The bank teller was so kind. She walked me through everything. "You don't have to bother." Her face twitched. Just for a moment. The mask slipped, and I saw the frustration flicker in her eyes. She quickly recovered, but I caught it. I always catch things they think I don't. Michael was less subtle. He stormed in 2 days later, his tie loosened, his face red with anger. He slapped a stack of papers onto the table. "The bank says I can't apply for a loan against the house," he barked. "They said the deed isn't under your name anymore." What the hell is going on, Mum? I sat calmly at the dining table, hands folded neatly. "Oh, Michael, you know how confusing those papers are? I must have signed something without realizing." His eyes narrowed. "Don't play games. Did you change the deed?" Melissa came in then, heels clicking on the tile, her arms folded across her chest. "You'd better not be sabotaging us, Edith. We've been planning around this. Do you know how hard it is to get approved for credit these days? We could lose the chance at that new property." There it was. Not even a shred of pretense. They didn't care about my health, my future, my peace. They cared about a new property. My house wasn't even mine in their eyes anymore. It was leverage. I let the silence stretch, sipping from my teacup. Well, I said at last, voice quiet but steady. Perhaps the bank made a mistake. Michael's fists clenched at his sides. You're hiding something. I'll find out what it is. I smiled faintly, the way I used to when he was a boy throwing tantrums over candy in the store. Of course you will, dear. Inside, I felt something cold and satisfying unfurl. They were beginning to realize the ground they stood on wasn't solid, and they had no idea just how much deeper the quicksand went. That evening, I overheard Melissa on the phone, pacing the hallway. No, the accounts are frozen. I don't know why. She's playing dumb, but she knows exactly what she's doing. Michael's furious. Linda's useless. We'll figure it out. Just give me time. Her voice dropped, but not enough. I caught the edge of desperation there. The kind of desperation that comes when people realize their schemes are slipping through their fingers. I sat in my bedroom, listening, and thought, good. Let them squirm. Let them wonder. Let them sweat under the weight of their own greed. The next morning, Linda tried again, this time with feigned sympathy. She brought me breakfast in bed, burnt toast and undercooked eggs, but she smiled as though she'd prepared a feast. Mum, she said, perching on the edge of the bed, we're just worried about you. All this stress over finances, it's not good for your heart. Why don't you just sign a power of attorney? That way, Michael and I can handle everything. You can rest easy. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with outrage. They wanted me to hand them the keys, to sign away the last of my independence so they could bleed me dry while I sat powerless. I forced a weak chuckle. Oh, darling, that sounds so complicated. I don't even know what that means. Maybe another time? Her smile faltered. You don't have to understand, Mom. Just trust us, trust. That word stung like a slap. Trust was what I had given them for decades. Trust had raised them, fed them, clothed them. And now they wanted to twist that trust into a weapon. But the more they pressed, the calmer I became. Each demand, each slip-up, each moment of greed only reminded me that my plan was working. They were on the outside, clawing at doors that were already locked. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I thought of Robert again. I could almost hear his voice, steady and protective. Don't let them bully you, Edith. You've earned your peace, I whispered back. I'm not bullied anymore, Robert. They think I'm cornered, but it's them. They're the ones trapped. And as I turned off the light and settled into bed, I allowed myself a small smile. The bank would be calling again soon. And when it did, the storm I'd been quietly building would finally break. It was a Thursday morning when the call came. I was sitting at the kitchen table sipping my tea when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but the words carried weight. Mrs. Grant? This is Rachel from the bank. I wanted to inform you we've denied the loan application submitted by your son. We also noticed several attempts to access accounts you've closed. Don't worry. We've flagged everything. Only you have control. I thanked her quietly, my fingers tightening around the receiver. Then I hung up and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Not half an hour later, the front door burst open. Michael stormed in, face red, his voice booming. What the hell did you do, Mom? Linda was right behind him, eyes wild, Melissa at her side with her lips pressed thin. They didn't even bother with greetings. They marched straight into my living room like wolves circling their prey. Michael threw papers onto the coffee table, his hands shaking. The bank called us. They said the accounts are closed. The deed's been transferred. You've destroyed everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? I set my teacup down gently, my hands steady, despite the storm in front of me. I know exactly what I've done. Melissa's voice rose, sharp and shrill. You selfish old woman. We've been planning around that money for months. And you… what? You just give it away? Linda's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were frustration, anger, desperation. Mom, how could you do this to us? We're your children. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but cutting. Children? You stood outside my hospital room and called me done. You said not to waste medicine on me. You laughed about my life draining my account. Don't you dare stand here and call yourselves my children when you treated me like a burden before I even left that bed. The room went silent. Their faces drained of colour, shock rippling across them. They hadn't realised I had heard. Michael tried to recover, his voice cracking. Mum, you misunderstood. We were just stressed. We didn't mean, don't lie to me, I snapped, the edge in my voice stronger than I'd ever let them hear. You meant every word. And I meant mine when I promised myself you'd never touch what Robert and I built. Not a cent, not a brick, not a memory. Melissa stepped forward, fists clenched. So what? You gave it to strangers? To that nurse girl next door? You think she deserves it more than your own blood? I looked her dead in the eye. Yes. Her jaw dropped. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. I signed the deed to Anna. The accounts are under my sole control. Everything you thought was waiting for you is gone. Not because I don't love the children I raised, but because you stopped acting like my children the moment you started circling like vultures. Linda shook her head, tears spilling now, but still no remorse in her voice. Just panic. Mum, please, think about what you're doing. You're leaving us with nothing. We have bills, plans, futures. And what about my future? I cut in, my voice sharp. You were willing to let me die so you could collect. My future meant nothing to you. So now, yours means nothing to me. Michael's rage boiled over. He slammed his hand against the wall, his voice rising. You'll regret this, Mom. When you're alone, when you need us, you'll wish you hadn't done this. I stood then, slowly but firmly, leaning on my cane. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. No, Michael. I regret every moment I believed you loved me unconditionally. I regret raising children who measure worth in dollars instead of memories. But I do not regret protecting myself from your greed. I stepped closer, tapping the cane against the hardwood floor between us. The bank has records of every suspicious withdrawal while I was hospitalized. David has files documenting everything you tried to pull. If you push me further, I won't just cut you off. I'll have you investigated. And when that happens, you won't just lose money. You'll lose everything. Silence fell. Melissa's face went pale, her bravado gone. Linda looked away, shame flickering for the first time. Michael's fists clenched and unclenched, but even he didn't dare speak again. I lowered my voice, almost whispering. I may be old, but I am not weak. You wanted me gone. Well, I am gone. From your lives, your plans, your futures. Consider this the last time you'll ever stand in this house as my heirs. Then I turned, picked up my teacup, and sat back down, calm as if the storm had never entered. Now, I said softly, close the door on your way out. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then, one by one, they turned and left, slamming the door behind them. When the silence returned, I exhaled slowly. My hands shook just slightly, but it wasn't fear. It was release. For the first time in years, I felt free. The house was quiet after they left, almost too quiet. But it wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness anymore. It was the calm of a storm that had finally passed. I sat there in my chair, the sunlight spilling across the floor, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. For the next few days, I kept to myself. I cooked small meals, tended to my roses, read the same books Robert and I once shared in the evenings. Life had returned to its simple rhythm. My children didn't call, didn't visit, and I didn't expect them to. Shame can silence even the loudest mouths. But I wasn't alone. Not really. Anna, my neighbour's daughter, stopped by one afternoon with a casserole dish in her hands. She looked at me with the kind of genuine warmth I hadn't seen on my children's faces in years. I heard them yelling the other day, she admitted, hesitating in my doorway. Are you okay? I smiled, stepping aside to let her in. I'm better than okay, dear. Sit with me. We sat at the table, eating together, talking about her patients at the hospital, about her dreams of opening a small clinic someday. I listened, nodding, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was speaking with family, not blood, but family nonetheless. Later that week, Rachel from the bank called again. Mrs. Grant, I just wanted to confirm all your changes are complete. Your accounts are secure, and the deed has been fully transferred. If anyone attempts anything suspicious, we'll contact you directly. Thank you, I said, my voice calm, steady. I appreciate you looking out for me. When I hung up, I thought about how different that call must have sounded to Michael and Linda. For them, the bank had been a door slamming shut, a reminder that their mother wasn't the feeble woman they thought. For me, it was a reminder that I still had power. Of course, they tried. Linda sent a message a week later, full of saccharine apologies. Mum, we didn't mean what we said. Families fight. Please, let's put this behind us. I didn't reply. Michael showed up once, pounding on the door, demanding to talk. I didn't answer. I watched from the upstairs window as he stormed away, shouting into his phone. His voice carried, but his words didn't matter anymore. They had already lost me long before the bank call confirmed it. In the quiet of my evenings, I let myself reflect. I thought about Robert, about the promises we had made to each other when we first bought this house. I remembered his warning that money can twist even the strongest bonds, and how I had dismissed it. He had been right, but I also thought about something else, about the resilience of people like us, people who have weathered losses, buried loved ones, survived illnesses, and carried on. My children thought I was done. They thought I had nothing left but fading breaths and a fragile heart. What they didn't realize was that surviving isn't about the body, it's about the will, and my will was stronger than their greed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the garden glowed golden, I stood at the edge of the roses. They were blooming again, stubbornly, beautifully, despite the weeds and storms. I touched a petal and whispered, "We made it, Robert. They won't ruin what we built." I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. Hurt, yes. Betrayed, yes. But not angry. Anger is heavy, and I had carried enough weight in my life. What I felt now was clarity. I had chosen peace over poison. So, to you who are listening, let me leave you with this. Family isn't always the ones who share your blood. Sometimes family is the nurse who brings you groceries without being asked. Sometimes it's the neighbor who checks on you after a storm. Sometimes it's the roses that keep blooming even when the world tries to bury you. If anyone ever tells you you're done, prove them wrong. Not with shouting, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of taking back control. I looked around my home that night, the walls still echoing with decades of laughter, the photos still smiling back from their frames. This house was no longer a prize waiting for greedy hands. It was mine, until the day I decided otherwise. They thought my life was finished, I said softly, almost as if speaking to the empty room. But the truth is, it was our bond that ended, not me. And when the phone rang again, not with their voices, but with a friend inviting me to tea, I smiled, because that was the life I chose. Not one chained to their greed, but one finally free. Thank you for listening to my story. My name is Edith Grant, and I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Because wherever you are, remember this. Your story isn't over until you decide it is.